JBL Xtreme 2 summary. It's been a long road with the JBL Xtreme 2. I feel like I've had it for a year, or it's been like 4 weeks or something like that. However, a lot has changed since I did my unboxing and several follow-up videos trying to answer several questions like, how does it sound against the Flip 4? How does it sound against the Charge 3? Is it louder than the Xtreme 1? Does it change on AC? Many questions to be answered. I try to answer them like many other people. I'm not saying I was first to YouTube. In fact, I was way behind the others as per usual. But during all those videos, along comes firmware 1.6. So at this point, and up till now, when you got your JBL Xtreme 2, it was shipping with firmware 1.2. As soon as the reviews started coming out, everyone was saying, blimey, it sounds like it's 20 watts, as they did say on their own website. I think they've removed that the last time I looked. However, when it hit, the specifications on the JBL website were 20 watts on battery, 40 watts on AC power. It was a major shock because, of course, the Xtreme 1 was 30 watts on battery and 40 watts on AC, which meant on battery, the Xtreme 1 was going louder than the Xtreme 2, which of course is significantly larger and heavier. Along comes this firmware update 1.6, which said it just fixes some bugs. Now, just fixing some bugs turned out to change the sound, so increase the bass, reduce some of those highs, increase the power limit to 30 watts. Didn't say that, but clearly that's what it was. Comparing before and after and comparing against Xtreme, it's clear that they lifted the limit from 20 watts to 30 watts on battery. Not the end of the story, because at the time of this video, they've rolled back on that firmware 1.6. Well, not exactly rolled back, but they're not rolling it out. They're saying, apparently, I think there's a bug which doesn't allow it to connect to some iMacs, I believe. But however, they have, at the point of this video, rolled back on releasing it. So the point of this summary video is just to go back over the other questions and answer exactly where we are and roll them all into one, but a shorter video. You can go back over my other videos where I answer all those questions, but in a longer video with more examples. I also say it's been a long, rocky road because on first unboxing, on an AB with the JBL Xtreme 1, I wasn't overly impressed. What I heard was quite a piercing high. It sounded a little bit boxy, and doing an AB comparison with the Xtreme 1, the Xtreme 1 seemed to be a little bit wider, a little bit more stereo separation. However, that could be because there's more mids in the Xtreme 2, so that'll give a sense of airiness to the Xtreme 1. But doing an AB, and on that day one, and you know, that was my initial impression, my honest initial impression, I was a bit disappointed with Xtreme 2. It was obviously narrow sounding when I did a straight comparison side by side with the Xtreme 1. It was clearer that the bass went deeper, and it was clearer that it had more mids. However, it wasn't balanced to my ears. It was still bass, highs, not a lot of mids, just a bit thicker than the Xtreme 1. So I was underwhelmed on day one. However, on a longer listen, I came to appreciate its sound signature, which was a very forward vocal. I found I grew to like that more and more. So, not balanced sound. You know, I'm surprised a lot of people are saying it's more balanced, it's more hi-fi. That surprises me. It doesn't sound like that to me. However, it's a fun speaker. But to me, I liked it because it had forward vocals, very clear vocals. They hang in front of the speaker. The bass was just the right side of over-egged. So it was big, it was boomy. Well, not boomy, but it was roundy. You know, and it's roundish and big, if that makes any sense, and deeper than Xtreme 1. But without the real Xtreme 1's real thump, but real boominess. So it overwhelmed when you want to listen indoors. I liked how it was judged well on the Xtreme 2, that I could listen indoors with my neighbours, and it didn't tip the balance between, oh, that's a bit too much, and, oh, there's nothing there. It was nicely balanced. No mids. I mean, I am a fan of mids. I prefer, for my long-term listen, something sweet and warm in the mids. You know, I want bass, I want highs, but it's the mids that I really focus on. Of course, it's a matter of taste. I also found that whatever volume you listened at didn't really alter that sound signature much. Obviously your bass is reduced as you go up the high volumes, but the sound signature doesn't change. And you can listen at low volumes. Can't do that with Xtreme 1. This was, for me, before firmware 1.6, my favourite listen for low level listening. You still got a big bass. You still got that clear forward vocal. But you could listen at low volumes. I love my Bolitz 17, but you can't listen at low volumes. Fantastic mid to high volumes. I can listen to this and enjoy it at low volumes and still get a punchy, fun sound. And then firmware 1.6 came. It said, just to fix bugs. Went ahead, updated. What I found was, actually, yes, it raised the power limit 20 watts to 30 watts. So it got louder, which would seem to be everyone's main complaint because people really want to listen to these outdoors and there was no comparison outdoors. It increased the bass punch a little bit. Not huge, but subtly obvious, if that makes sense. It reduced that high end a little bit. So a little bit on the bass and a little bit off the high end was enough for me to change the sound signature. It now become a little bit dull and a little bit boring for me at moderate to low volumes, which is where it came into its own as far as I'm concerned. And since I've been playing it firmware 1.6, I've listened to it less and less. I did have 2 of these, sent one back because it does lose a bit when you play as a stereo pair. So it does lose a bit of that clarity, even before firmware 1.6. So I sent it back because it was not worth it to me for it to have 2. But I was enjoying the Xtreme 2 on its own until firmware 1.6. And I have to say, more and more, I am not liking it. Is it fun outside? It's a great outside speaker. But for me, it came into its own because it was a great speaker indoors. Not so much now. I'm seeing other people still loving it and saying it's a big improvement. I'm just saying, from my personal point of view, which is the whole point of my video, it's become a little bit dull and boring to me. Once you get over that 10-second hit of the big bass, you know, it's a big sound. It's not great for trying to pick out details in your tracks. You know, it's not something for me, serious listening. I'm seeing other people say something different, but I don't hear much in the way of instrument separation. I don't get a great stereo image. I mean, it's there. It's just not great. I would rather play my 2 Charles 3s, and I'm going to get to that, in stereo, indoors, at moderate volumes, than the Xtreme 2. So that's almost maybe going up for sale on eBay. I'm still considering it. Just wanted to say, so the point of the summary video, my older videos were before the firmware 1.6, and a lot has changed, and my opinions have changed. A lot along the way. Now, a quick summary and review of the Xtreme 2. Exactly what it's like to live with. So obviously, I've already explained some of the differences between the Xtreme 1, apart from the fact it's bigger and it's a little bit heavier. It comes with a strap, and everyone's talking about the bottle opener. It seems to be a love it or hate it. I love it, and as a personally, you can stick more of these on as far as I'm concerned. You know, as I said before, I'd like to have a Swiss Army knife type of thing. You know, lots of things like that. So when you are on the move, it's just a handy thing to have. I don't find it gets in the way. Some people find it really annoying, and some people don't like the strap. Personally, quite like it. And apparently, no matter what colour you get the Xtreme 2 in, you still get a black strap. I don't know if that's the case, but that's what I was told before. So that does seem a little bit odd. Probably a little bit penny pinching and not ordering different colour straps by JBL. So it comes with what looks like a new charger. However, it's still a 19 volt 3 amp charger. That's 57 watts. Now, they're using proprietary lead on that. It's the same charge, although it looks a little bit different. They are the same chargers, it's specs wise, between the Xtreme 1 and the Xtreme 2. And I'm saying it's a big miss because in this day and age of USB-C, where you can get 20 volts, 5 amps out of USB-C, in other words, even higher spec than the charger, it's the standalone charger that you get with the JBL, could easily have charged this using USB-C. So again, a big miss there. It really is a nuisance these days having to travel with a separate charger. We got so used to just using a USB lead. Why we couldn't have a USB-C, I don't know. Obviously, it was going to cost them a bit more to implement. It's Bluetooth 4.1 on the Xtreme 1. It's now Bluetooth 4.2, which means it's now from a 4 decibel milliwatts Bluetooth transmitter power to 12.5 decibel milliwatts. So that's a significant upgrade between the two if you're trying to decide, is it worth it? Well, if you've had problems with Bluetooth connections, significantly more Bluetooth transmission power on the Xtreme 2. Splash proof the Xtreme 1. Submergible, theoretically, on the Jbl Xtreme 2. It's IPX7, which means it's obviously dust proof and you can submerge it in up to 1 meter of water for up to 30 minutes. I'm saying theoretically because there are the videos out there saying that having submerged their Xtreme 2 and played it for 30 minutes, it actually damaged the speaker. Probably not a good idea anyway, because when it floats with the drivers down. I'm guessing it's not a 360 degree speaker. The drivers are facing forward. And it floats like that. Yes, it is a little bit unbelievable that they would do that. And I wonder if someone third party is going to come up with some sort of Xtreme 2 designed raft, inflatable raft, or something the size of an Xtreme 2 that will allow you to play it that way. You know, face up and actually protect it from being submerged in the water. Which would be, I think, a great idea. It's obviously Connect Plus versus on the Xtreme 2 versus Xtreme 1 Connect. It is amazing how it still confuses people, the difference between Connect and Connect Plus and what can and cannot connect to each other in terms of present JBL speakers and past JBL speakers. Because it is actually quite simple. You can only connect Connect Plus speakers to Connect Plus other speakers, and you can only connect speakers to other Connect speakers. You can only connect 2 maximum Connect speakers, and you can connect up to 100 or more apparently Connect Plus speakers, or if you want them in stereo, 2. So you've still got a 2 limit in stereo. Just to clarify, you cannot connect a Connect Plus speaker to a Connect speaker, and if you update your Connect speaker to Connect Plus speaker, as in say the JBL Charge 3, you will never be able to make it go back to Connect. And it will always have to connect to other Connect Plus speakers, not other Connect speakers. So if you have a Flip 3, which is Connect, and you update your Connect Charge 3 to Connect Plus, you will no longer ever be able to connect it to your Flip 3. The woofers are bigger. 70mm on the Xtreme 2, 60mm on the Xtreme 1. However, the tweeters are smaller. Now 20mm on the Xtreme 2, 35mm on the Xtreme 1. We've now got bigger and apparently 3D passive radiators on the side there. They're saying it's 3D. I mean, it's not in your face 3D, but it's a little bit 3-dimensional. And the point about that is, along with having a bit more excursion, it does allow for deeper bass when it becomes dome-like and more 3D. You've got more surface area for a given space, obviously. So you can see, you know, that's flat, or there's a slight dome, but that's got a little bit more of an obvious round shape to it. So that allows for greater surface area. In terms of excursion, it's obviously looser for a start than on the Xtreme 1. I mean, that's very obvious at a light touch. However, they do describe them as having more excursion, having a longer throw. The battery capacity is the same. Now, I've never fully tested the Xtreme 1, I have to say, but I did test the Xtreme 2. Before firmware update, on maximum volume, playing constantly. Pre-firmware 1.6, I was getting up to 10 hours, 15 minutes. So bear in mind, on 20 watts, which is still great. It's still a big sound, and I could play it for 10 hours. So I could happily lay on the beach, 10 hours, full volume, albeit 20 watts. Obviously, raising the limit, it doesn't change how long it's going to play at 20 watts. However, the new maximum being 30 watts, and that couldn't get over 5 hours. So bear in mind, if you're just not worried, if you're not going by, that's the same exact sound pressure level as I had at 20 watts. It would still, of course, it would still be over 10 hours, 15 minutes I was getting. But at 30 watts, maximum 4.5 to 5 hours maximum, which is still great. Still 30 watts, still loud enough. But still, you know, more time than you should have in the sun on the beach. However, I'm just pointing out that theoretically, after the firmware update, your maximum battery life at full volume has gone from 10 hours to 5 hours. However, of course, all this changes, you're now playing it louder. But that's what I was getting anyway. You get a single USB out to charge some other device. You got two on the Xtreme one. I don't think it's a big deal, and personally I never use it. But if you really did need it for an emergency charge, your mobile phone or something, you've only got one. If your girlfriend's got a phone to charge, she's out of luck. The official specs have changed from 70 Hz to 20 kHz on the Xtreme 1 to 55 Hz to 20 kHz on the Xtreme 2. Now, JBL do not specify plus or minus decibels. So, on the face of it, it's almost meaningless, because unless you know what the actual range they're measuring in, it doesn't mean a lot. However, I have to say, JBL specs do seem quite accurate to real world, and it does hold bass till about 55 Hz before starting to roll off. So, even, they might as well have said plus or minus 3 decibels, which is pretty much standard. But they don't, I suppose, to cover themselves. I don't know why. Yeah, it's certainly within that range. So, certainly deeper bass. Although some people say, oh, it's still got a bigger bass on the Xtreme 1, but it has a bigger slam. It has a bigger boost. And you can do exactly the same if you equalise the Xtreme 2. And then you have the best of both worlds. A bigger slam and deeper bass. For most tracks, it's a little bit louder. The bass punch on the Xtreme 1. The power lights are now in an awkward place. Now, if I turn it on, just to notice, it starts off white, and when it's connected, there's a welcome sign, by the way. I'll get onto that again in a minute. And it goes blue when you're connected, of course. It would flash if you're trying to connect for the first time and you've hit the Bluetooth connect button, which is there. The Bluetooth button is there. Now, the power lights, you can't see them in a normal position, whereas you could on the Charge 1. Now, on the Xtreme 1, not the Charge 1, on the Xtreme 1. Let's turn that on. A little bit easier to see those power lights. This is now facing down, whereas those weren't. I mean, it looks like a subtle difference, but that difference is enough to seeing and not seeing. Unless obviously you're looking at it from below. So, yeah, that's not great. Let's turn that one off. And the thing about that welcome tone is, of course, you can now turn it off in your app. So you go into the app, you go to your options, you go to, so you can now turn off that welcome sound, that boom, kaboom, when you turn it on, turn it off. But there's a problem. So yeah, great, oh, late at night, I don't want everybody, you know, even if you've got it on low volume, the boom is still loud. It's a little bit crazy. It's not in sync with the volume. So yeah, you can go to your app, but there's a problem. So you fire up your app, you go to your options, and you see it says audio feedback sounds. Now the problem is, if you turn off, you can't turn them off individually. So that it means everything. If I turn that off, audio feedback sounds off. Feedback sounds will be muted when the speaker is turned on or off or connected. Got it. Also means you don't get your connect sound. Now, fair enough, unlike on Connect Plus, hearing that sound go on when you hit Connect Plus doesn't mean it's connected to another speaker. So fair enough, it's a little bit meaningless anyway, in that it just tells you it's on, and of course it tells you that anyway because it lights up. But supposing I want to know if this is on maximum volume, turn Connect off. And by the way, I just want to point out, like on the Charge 3 Flip 4 speakers I've tested, hitting the Connect Plus button has changed the sound. It doesn't seem to do that now on the Xtreme 2. So you don't get that option of like a quick equalizer app. It doesn't change the sound in any way, as far as I can see, hitting that Connect Plus button. But suppose I want to know it's on full volume, and normally, you know, it's fully synced. Normally you'd go. Do you see my point? I don't know if that's on full volume because you normally get a little sound telling me that. So if I turn that audio feedback on, you see, it's all or nothing. Now if I want to know if it's on full volume, boom, 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 boom. I know it's on full volume. I know it's fully synced. So that's
really crazy. Whoever has programmed that on JBL, it's all or nothing. And okay, some of these things like the Connect Plus you don't need. You certainly want to know if it's fully synced. I've got no other way of knowing that. It pretty much covers everything about the speaker in use, my feelings about it, how it's changed from original firmware to the current firmware, and that some people will not be able to get it at the moment, at the time of the video. But I'm sure, of course, you will get that raising of the power and the changing of the sound signature somewhere down the line. Something to bear in mind is when that comes along, do you really want to do it? Do you want to lose those forward vocals, the high end, and the ability to play it at low volume without that over-egged, too boomy bass you'd get on the Xtreme 1? Because you're going to lose that with the firmware update. Now, questions that people seem to want to know. Just a quick summary of the Xtreme 1 versus... Now, I've already covered how does it sound AC versus AC and battery maximum volume. So they're both about the same maximum volumes now. So they both go to the same 30 watt maximum battery, 40 watts maximum AC power. The JBL Xtreme 1 will have a little more punch. It may sound louder if you've got bass heavy punchy tracks. However, the Xtreme 2 has a fuller sound, and if you average out the actual sound, the Xtreme 2 is actually a little bit louder. So there's almost nothing in it, and it depends on the sound of what you're actually playing. In this quick example, it actually had a bigger slam. I'm going to give it away on the Xtreme 2. It was a little bit of an anomaly. Overall, there's more punch on the Xtreme 1. However, this is the Xtreme, how it sounds, the Xtreme 2 versus the Xtreme 1, around 45% volume normalized, so they're around the same volume as you hear it.
Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. On how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. Right now.
So straight comparison between the Xtreme 1 and the Xtreme 2, around the same volume levels and normalized to try and get them as equal to each other as possible with a different sound. You're never going to get that perfect. And on this A-B comparison, you straight off the bat, it does look like there's a 3 decibel higher peak on the Xtreme 2, which surprised me because most tracks do not show that. I guess it was something to do with this track. I wasn't really expecting. I thought there'd be more punch on the Xtreme 1. However, I've got to say, this is what I got. It was a bigger punch on the Xtreme 2, and it's a fuller bass. You can see how it falls away quicker with the Xtreme 1. The real difference in the sound is the high end. You've got that very high, piercing high on the Xtreme 1, which is accentuated by the dip between 2 and 5,000 hertz, which isn't there on the Xtreme 2. So less of a high on the Xtreme 2, but it's a smoother sound. So I think it's more listenable on the Xtreme 2. Doesn't mean to say Xtreme 1 is that terrible at these volume levels. It almost has a shimmer that I don't really hear on the Xtreme 2, which I quite like. However, it's a thinner sound. It does have a piercing treble, and that's the big difference. The Xtreme 1 sounds thinner. It has, most of the time, a bigger punch, but the Xtreme 2 does have a bigger real bass. It's slightly overdone to me, especially after the firmware update, but not as much as the boomy Xtreme 1. The mids are about the same, as you can see. They're both peaking around 27 decibels. So the real difference is that high end and the drop away in the Xtreme 1, which makes it sound quite a thin sound. Not very pleasant for a long listen. How does it sound against 2 charged 3s in stereo? Should I get 2 charged 3s or should I get 1 Xtreme? Now, some people also want to know, should I get a charge to add to it? Or if I've already got a charge, how will it sound paired with that? Now, I've answered that in previous videos. This is simply answering, is it better to get 2 charged 3s so I can play them in stereo, or 1 Xtreme 2?
I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting no time for me. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. Walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for me. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for me. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for me. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul.
So, comparing a pair of charge 3s against the Xtreme 2, the charge 3s in stereo mode, both played at 45% thereabouts volume, and then normalized to the same volume. Even then, the Xtreme 2 has a way bigger bass. The Xtreme 2 cannot compete in any way, shape or form with the bass on the Xtreme 2. However, a pair of charge 3s, you do get a decent stereo separation for around the same money as you'd pay for a single Xtreme 2. You can pick out elements of the music that you cannot do with the Xtreme 2. There's nothing subtle about the Xtreme 2, especially after the firmware update where they've rolled back on the sharp, clear high end. In terms of bass, in terms of the sound, the charge 3 is almost a mirror image of the Xtreme 2. You've got reasonable highs and the big bass, whereas the charge 3 doesn't have those highs. It has a recess high. It has some bass, but nowhere near the bass of the Xtreme 2, but it is mid-centric. You get a lot of mids, which you're not getting on the Xtreme 2, relative to the rest of the music, of course. When it comes to the maximum volume, there is simply no comparison. The charge 3 falls away completely. There's basically no bass, still no highs, and it's all mids. It's not a great listen, it's a very poor listen compared to the Xtreme 2, which is still a decent listen. Although the bass is still heavily reduced, there is still bass there. You can still hear it. You're still getting some highs. You're still getting a decent sound, albeit reduced bass. But compared to a pair of charge 3s in stereo, there is no comparison. You cannot listen to the pair of charge 3s at maximum volume in the same way as you can listen to the Xtreme 2. One is devoid of almost any reasonable sound, and the other one, the Xtreme 2, is still a decent listen at maximum volume. So, as someone who personally, for my personal listening, moderate, close-up listening, easy listening, I do prefer my 2 charge 3s. Some people will say it's unbelievable and I don't know what I'm talking about, blah, blah. However, that's my taste. That's me. I do like it. I'm not going to lie. I'm not saying there's any way to compare the sounds. Obviously, it's a bigger sound on the Xtreme 2. However, I can pick out nuances in a track when I have 2 charge 3s separated, nice, a couple of feet apart in stereo, which I can't do on the Xtreme 2. It's an easier listen. It's a bit bland now on the Xtreme. I know there's no highs, and I can equalize that on the charge 3s. So I know all that. I'm just saying, those are the tracks. You make up your own mind. For me personally, say 50% or lower volume on the charge 3, I prefer the 2 charge 3s in stereo. I admit it. Other question, how do 2 flip 4s compare to 1 Xtreme 2?
Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. that life is full of surprises. You better realize, better realize. Why now? Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. Why now? Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, better realize. Why now?
A pair of flip 4s in stereo, about 45% volume, normalized to sound the same as the Xtreme 2 at 45% volume, normalized. So on first AB, it looks like, oh, the flip 4 has a fuller sound. But of course, a closer look at the decibel levels, you can see actually the bass is 10 decibels down. And the rest of the sound on the Xtreme 2 is as loud as the flip 4. It's just that relative to the rest of the sound, the Xtreme 2 has the bigger bass. And so it may look like the flip 4 has a bigger sound, a fuller sound on first look at those graphs, but then you've got to realise the decibel scale is different. So actually, the Xtreme 2 is massively higher on the bass. You know, you just can't compare. And I have to say, when you go to Connect Plus, which does change the sound of a single flip 4 or a single Charge 3, a pair of flip 4s in stereo, for me, is no comparison to the Charge 3s. I'm still getting a reasonable sound at around these volumes, which I don't like on the flip 4. It sounds thin, and the bass is just more like a wet box, really. To me, to my ears. You may well disagree. So again, there's no real comparison to a pair of flip 4s to the Xtreme 2. You've got a much bigger sound, and I don't even think you can pick out the elements of the music in the same way as you can with a pair of Charge 3s in stereo. So personally, I much prefer a pair of Charge 3s in stereo than a pair of flip 4s. But neither can really compare to the Xtreme 2, but the Charge 3 can, in the sense that you can pick out details which I don't think you can with the flip 4. When you go to maximum volume, funny enough, the flip 4 looks like it's leveling out its sound, not quite so boosted at each end. And of course, it's way down in the decibel scale. You've still got bass, you've still got a decent listen on the Xtreme 2. It's not really listenable on the flip 4 or the Charge 3s at maximum volume. However, at maximum volume is a little bit of a smoother sound than the Charge 3, but really comparing crap with crap, to be quite honest. So again, you know, it's like 10 decibels off, even though on paper there's more watts been put out by the flip 4, by a pair of flip 4s against the Xtreme 2. I have to point out this is on battery, so that is 36 watts versus 30 watts on paper. Obviously there's a lot of other things that go into the mix. I'm just saying you can compare, because on paper there's more watts on the flip 4s. However, there is no comparison in the sound. So I think the flip 4 holds out a bit more when you go to maximum volume, but it's still pretty bad. And at lower volumes is a thin sound. I prefer the Charge 3s over it. A lot of people, again, say, oh, the flip 4. But it's very much a matter of taste, because they are kind of a mirror of each other. The Charge 3 is mid-centric. The flip 4 is boosted bass, boosted treble. It sounds quite clear, but there's not a lot in the middle. It's a thin sound. You know, it's a matter of taste. That's music. Does plugging in AC noticeably change the sound versus battery? You've got a big change when you change to AC power on the Xtreme 1. You've got a much more boost to the bass. What happens with the Xtreme 2?
The stormy seas, oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me.
So matching sound levels, AC, battery, almost no difference to the sound, except there is a subtle, very small difference in the bass. Slightly bigger bass relative to the rest of the sound when you plug in the power lead at the same sound pressure levels as when you had it running on battery, but it's almost within the margin of error. It's almost nothing different, but so it's within probably a margin of error, but there is a very, very subtle difference. At most you can say a 1 decibel gain in the bass relative to the rest of the sound curve, and it's slightly rounder in the bass. If you look right at the top there, the 16 decibels, 65 hertz, it's slightly rounder. It slightly maintains the bass longer below that 65 hertz on AC. So it looks like there's a slight gain, but it could well be within a margin of error. When you go to maximum volume, so obviously battery is not quite the maximum volume as AC, it's 30 watts versus 40 watts. If you have done the firmware upgrade, if you manage to get it, again, it doesn't change the sound in any appreciable way. The sound curve is basically the same, but there is a little bit more bass. It does give you a little bit more bass, but again, here we're comparing 30 watts against 40 watts, so almost no difference. It's a little bit louder. The sound is a little bit fuller, but it's very subtle. There's very little in it. So unlike when you plugged Xtreme 1 into the AC power, when there was a significant difference in the amount of bass you got, it isn't the case with Xtreme 2. So a little bit, you know, there is a little bit, but in real listening, you're not really going to hear the difference. I don't think. There is a difference. It's subtle. I can't tell until I go to my graphs. But yeah, it's there. But on actual real world listening, I can't really tell the difference. So that pretty much sums up my experience with Xtreme 2. So firmware 1.6 or more is now, you know, a decent option outdoors. It does compare to the Xtreme 1. It is a fuller sound. It doesn't have quite the punch of the Xtreme 1, but it's a smoother sound. It plays cleaner. The bass plays cleaner. You can go louder with less distortion. It's an upgrade from the Xtreme 1. It could have been better. It could have been great with the USB-C charging. For me, 1.6 made it a little bit dull, a little bit boring. Yeah, it's still a big sound. I'm not saying it's not fun, but compared to before 1.6, as a low-level volume indoors, which I wasn't expecting it to be, it was great, with great forward vocals. No longer does that. So for me, a little bit disappointed with firmware 1.6. If you're only ever going to listen outdoors, you're going to say it's a great upgrade. If you only listen at high volumes, it's a great upgrade. If you don't, if you're looking for moderate to low volumes alongside your other listening, for me, you've lost that edge, where it really did shine for me. I know it's a big speaker to say, oh, I'm going to play it at low volumes. However, it was a full sound at low volume, you know, without annoying my neighbours. That was the thing. It was out on its own in that regards, because it was such a nice forward, you know, it boosted high end, but well judged, and they've rolled back on that. So I hope you got something out of my video, and thank you for watching.
UK